My DNA test exposed my family as biggest lie about our heritage, and it was all for profit. I was excited when I opened the email with my DNA results. I had always known who I was, or so I thought. My family had told me the story 1,000 times. Our heritage, our roots, our cultural identity passed down through generations. It was woven into everything about how I saw myself. But when I read those results, my hands started shaking. The ancestry percentages didn't match the narrative I had been fed my entire life. Not even close. Growing up, I was told I was half Bengali and half Puerto Rican. My mother's side was supposed to be from Kolkata, and my father's side from San Juan. We celebrated both cultures. I grew up eating home-cooked Bengali food my mother insisted she learned from her grandmother. I celebrated Durga Puja with pride. I spoke Spanish at home. I went to cultural festivals, wore traditional clothes during celebrations, and built my entire identity around being this beautiful blend of two rich, vibrant cultures. My parents owned a restaurant that specialized in authentic fusion cuisine, Bengali Puerto Rican fusion. It became incredibly popular. Food bloggers raved about the unique cultural perspective of the owners. My parents were invited to speak at cultural events about their heritage. They were featured in local magazines as examples of multicultural success stories. The restaurant thrived, and so did our family's reputation as cultural ambassadors. I went to college and studied cultural anthropology, partly because I wanted to understand my own heritage better. My professors praised my insider perspective when I wrote papers about Bengali and Puerto Rican cultures. I felt connected to something bigger than myself. I had a story, an identity that mattered. But those DNA results were telling a very different story. According to the test, I was 45% Northern European, 30% West African, 15% East Asian, and 10% South Asian. There was no Puerto Rican ancestry whatsoever. The Bengali heritage my mother had always emphasized was represented by a small percentage that could have come from anywhere in South Asia. I read the results over and over, thinking maybe I had made a mistake, that I was misunderstanding the percentages. But the numbers didn't lie. I called my mom immediately. I remember my voice shaking as I asked her about the results. There was a long silence on the other end. Too long. Then she said, "Sweetie, we should talk in person." That's when I knew. That's when I felt the first crack in everything I thought I knew. I drove to my parents' house that evening. My father was there too, and they sat me down in the living room like I was in trouble. My mother took a deep breath and began to explain. Apparently, neither of them was actually who they had claimed to be. My mother was adopted as a child and never knew her birth parents. My father had been adopted too. They had always wondered about their heritage, but never did DNA tests because they were afraid of what they might find. When they decided to open the restaurant, they realized that their lack of known heritage was an obstacle. Nobody wanted to eat at a restaurant run by people without a clear cultural identity. So they decided to create one. They chose Bengali and Puerto Rican because my mother had worked with a Puerto Rican family once and had eaten some of their food, and a Bengali family had been her neighbors when she was young. They studied the cuisines, learned the languages, and committed to their story so completely that eventually, they believed it themselves. Before we continue, we would like to thank all of you who support us by subscribing, liking, and sharing our content. The only appreciation we ask of you is that you subscribe, like, and share this video if you are not yet one of our subscribers. Thank you. We didn't mean to deceive you, my mother said, tears streaming down her face. It just snowballed. We were so invested in the story we created, and then you were born, and we didn't know how to tell you the truth. We wanted you to have an identity, something to be proud of. We didn't think about what it would mean to build that on a foundation of lies. I felt physically ill. I had spent my entire life celebrating a heritage that wasn't mine. I had written academic papers from a perspective that was fraudulent. I had gone to cultural events as someone I wasn't. Every accomplishment, every moment of pride in my identity. It was all tainted by the realization that it was constructed, manufactured, a marketing strategy. And worse, I realized the implications. My parents had profited from this lie. The restaurant's success was built on the exotic narrative they had created. They had capitalized on the very cultures they were appropriating. Every dish they served, every story they told to customers, every feature in a magazine. It was all part of an elaborate deception. I stood up and left without saying another word. I couldn't bear to be in that room any longer. I couldn't stand the sight of them looking at me with their guilty, pleading eyes. I felt betrayed in a way I had never experienced before. My entire sense of self had been obliterated in a single evening. The weeks after that conversation were a blur of confusion and anger. I didn't speak to my parents. I ignored their calls, their messages, their attempts to explain further. I was too hurt, too furious, too disoriented. I took another DNA test to confirm the results. It came back the same. I also requested my parents' DNA tests, and they complied, hoping it would somehow make things better. The results showed that my mother was primarily Scottish and West African, with some East Asian ancestry. My father was Eastern European and West African. There was no Bengali. There was no Puerto Rican. There was nothing that matched the story they had constructed for me. I started doing research into my actual heritage, who I actually was according to my DNA. I felt like I was meeting myself for the first time. I discovered family on ancestry databases, distant cousins I had never known existed. I learned about the actual histories of my genetic background, not the sanitized, curated version my parents had invented. One of my discoveries led me to a woman named Margaret. She was my third cousin on my father's side, and when I reached out to her, she was thrilled to hear from me. She shared family histories, photos, documents. Through her, I learned about my paternal grandmother's migration from Poland during World War II. I learned about relatives I had never heard of. I learned a real history, messy and complicated and beautiful in its authenticity. This process of discovering my actual heritage was healing in a strange way. It wasn't the heritage I had been raised with, but it was mine. It was real. It wasn't constructed for marketing purposes or built on cultural appropriation. Before we continue, we would like to thank all of you who support us by subscribing, liking, and sharing our content. The only appreciation we ask of you is that you subscribe, like, and share this video if you are not yet one of our subscribers. Thank you. Eventually, I had to confront the bigger picture. My parents hadn't just lied to me. They had exploited entire cultures. They had taken the authentic traditions and cuisine of Bengali and Puerto Rican people and used them as a commodity to build their business and reputation. Every accolade they received was built on a foundation of cultural appropriation and deception. I spoke with a journalist about my story and it went viral. The restaurant faced backlash. Customers felt betrayed. Food critics who had praised the authentic cultural perspective of my parents felt foolish. The media coverage was intense, and my parents' business crumbled within months. I felt conflicted about the fallout. Yes, they deserved consequences for their deception, but they were still my parents. I watched them lose their business, their reputation, their sense of identity. I watched my mother cry, finally admitting that she had been so desperate to belong to something, to have a story to tell, that she had invented an entire alternate reality. My father was more pragmatic about it. He apologized to the communities they had exploited. He acknowledged that their actions had been wrong, that they had profited from something sacred to other people. He worked with my mother to close the restaurant and donate a portion of their remaining assets to cultural organizations run by actual Bengali and Puerto Rican community members. What I learned through this experience was profound. Identity isn't something you can manufacture or buy. It's not a marketing strategy or a brand to be sold. Identity is complex and real and rooted in authentic connection to your actual heritage, your actual history, your actual people. I also learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most are acting from a place of pain themselves. My parents were adopted, rejected by their biological families, desperate for a sense of belonging. They tried to create that belonging for me through a lie, and in doing so, they robbed me of something they thought they were giving me. They gave me a false sense of identity instead of letting me discover my true one. Today, I'm still processing everything. I'm still learning about my actual heritage, my Scottish roots, my Polish ancestry, my West African lineage. I'm exploring these cultures with genuine respect and curiosity, as someone seeking to understand where I actually come from. It's different from how I grew up, but it's real. I've also reconnected with my parents, not without boundaries, not without acknowledging what happened, but with the understanding that they made a terrible choice based on their own trauma and insecurity. They've apologized. They're doing the work to understand the harm they caused, and I'm learning to forgive them, not because what they did was okay, but because holding on to that anger was only hurting me. I withdrew from my anthropology program. I couldn't continue writing from the perspective I had cultivated, but I'm redefining my path now, with authenticity as my foundation. I want to study cultural heritage in a way that honors and respects the actual communities these cultures belong to. This experience has taught me that the stories we tell about ourselves matter. They shape how we see the world and how we move through it. My parents' lie didn't just affect me. It affected everyone who believed their story. It's a powerful reminder that authenticity isn't something to be compromised. Real identity, real heritage, real belonging. These things can't be manufactured. They have to be discovered, earned, and lived truthfully. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the permission to be exactly who we actually are, without pretense, without performance, without the burden of a fabricated narrative. I'm still learning who that person is, but for the first time in my life, I'm learning it from a place of truth.